CDs are cheap right now. Well, cheap relative to other formats like vinyl. And it might be the perfect time to jump back into this. That or you're lucky enough that you haven't sold or thrown out your old collection. I lost a lot of my original collection. I think it was stolen out of my car. I can't say that would probably happen now. If a thief was digging through your car, it's probably one of the last things to take would be a booklet of CDs. But it's coming back. So let's dust off that old CD collection and throw it into a simple, cheap, and excellent sounding solution that we're going to cover today, but it's not without faults, and we're going to cover those too. So this is going to be a how to build the best sounding budget-friendly CD player. Go over its limitations, but also its advantages over a CD transport like the Audiolab 6000 CDT. And finally, a showdown between the two that gives you an idea what to expect here as far as performance and usability. You really don't have to spend a lot of money to start playing CDs again, and that's what's great about this. Today I'm going to show you just how easy it is with a secondhand buy and a couple upgrades that will for the most part have this competing with a $500 CD transport. If you're unaware what a CD transport is, to keep it as simple as possible, just think it's a CD player without a DAC. It needs an external DAC or to be plugged into something with one using a digital medium. What I picked up to start this project is a Sony Blu-ray player. I paid $20 for it, and it's not uncommon to find deals like this. There's loads of people who have unloaded their physical media and moved over to streaming. It's just, it's a lot easier for a lot of people. Take a look at places like Facebook Marketplace, thrift stores. People are always donating these type of devices, or even friends and family who will likely never fire up that old DVD player again. These type of devices used to have a lot more personal attachment. Things like old VHS players. There was lots of family vacations and things like that recorded on these formats. But DVDs and Blu-rays really didn't get that same sentimental attachment. And I think that's probably due to, the age of the phone, where everything just started to be recorded on phones instead. So these things are pretty much a dime a dozen to pick up these days. That or you might already have one sitting in your basement that hasn't been powered on for years. It'd be perfect for something like this. To take advantage of what we have planned today, basically you just need to find a decent quality DVD or Blu-ray player that has a digital out. We have two outputs on this one, a coax and HDMI. We're just going to be using the coax today. So let's just take a look at the options for upgrading, see how close we can get to the Audiolab CD transport, because honestly, the Blu-ray player alone just isn't going to be enough in my opinion. For one thing, there's no screen or buttons on the front of the Sony to know what's going on. You would normally have this hooked to a TV in almost all cases to see your track information. And really, without this, you're going to be flying blind here when it comes to seeing what's going on without a screen. Track controls, what's playing, the status, play pause, all that stuff. So a simple solution here, if you're not going to have this connected to a TV, which I think a lot of people won't want it connected to a TV because there's a lot of two-channel listeners who like to separate that space from the TV. I picked up this small screen on Amazon for $40 that plugs into the HDMI input. It came with an HDMI cable, and the only additional requirement was a USB power adapter, but I tend to guess you likely have about 5 or 10 of these laying around anyways. There we have it. Everything you were missing as far as visibility goes. It's not quite as big and bold as the track display on the Audiolab, but it certainly gets the job done, and it even opens you up to some other features that they're not available on the Audiolab, such as plugging in an external hard drive and browsing your external libraries of music, or even anything video related. This player has all the apps built in, so you can access other forms of streaming, music or video from within the player itself. There's obviously no buttons on the front when we compare these two, but there really isn't anything we can do about that limitation. But we do have all our track controls available in the remote, and really that's where I'd be operating this myself. So I guess that's an important point too. If you're shopping these, you should probably make sure that it includes a remote. If you could, please consider throwing a like, comment, or subscription my way. It really helps to grow the community and get in more interesting gear for reviews. Even if you just want to drop a comment and say hi, I always appreciate that too. Okay, back to it. One obvious performance limitation with using a DVD player or Blu-ray player is the onboard DAC. That is if you get one that has a DAC within the unit. The one we have today, we don't have to worry about that. That's just going to be the digital outputs. You'd know if you have this if you see RCA outputs. That basically tells you that the signal is converted to analog coming out of these RCA outputs. And you really don't want to use these if you don't have to. The onboard DACs in some of these DVD players can be, well, honestly pretty terrible in most cases. There's a few gems out there, but Today, we're just going to add a new SMSL PS200, which comes in around $90. It has an ES9039 DAC and the connections we need in this case to really improve the audio coming in from this. Just make sure the DVD player or Blu-ray player has something like a coax or optical out so you can bypass the internal DAC and go with something like this PS200. At $90, it's really a pretty sweet little addition to add here. One of the newest DAC chips available should honestly put this at a level with gear in much higher price brackets. And I'll link this one down below if you're looking for something like this. We did increase the price a bit here. The running total at the moment is $20 for the CD player, $40 for the screen, and $90 for the DAC, coming in at $150, which is still a steal at this level of performance and feature sets, especially when we compare it to the Audiolab coming in at around $500. Which by no means is actually an expensive CD player. If you search these out, you could easily spend in the thousands on something like this. A little side note on that PS200 DAC, if you guys stick around to the end, I'm going to show a way to use that with some vintage gear to bring in all the modern touches to some of your favorite older receivers too. So we do have some options here too. Straight out of the box, we could have this running and playing CDs if we wanted to skip the external DAC, but you do need the right equipment in place. We would just take the coax cable and run it from the Sony here to something like this Audiolab 6000A, which being an integrated amp does have a built-in DAC. Not quite to the level as the 9039 in the PS200, but it would work fine in this case. So run it over to one of its digital inputs and done deal. We have a CD player in this case for $20, plus whatever you need for cables if you don't already have some laying around. Where this one gets interesting to myself is now we have a dedicated CD transport and a secondhand Blu-ray player, both utilizing the same DAC. And guess what? I went back and forth many times, and I was unable to hear any discernible difference in quality when they both were connected to the same DAC. The Audiolab internal and the external PS200. And this honestly didn't surprise me either. A digital signal like this going through the same DAC should sound the same, which is exactly why these budget buys are such a good and cheap way to get back into physical media. So now I gave up the not so big secret that it sounds the same. But it's not quite so simple to just crown the cheaper product yet. There are some considerations. Some may not affect you, but it's good to know. The Audiolab 6000 CDT was able to handle disc defects better than the Blu-ray player. They both did fine, and it was almost impossible for me to find a disc that had issues. But on some of my really old ones from like high school days, some of those discs where they were likely just kind of thrown around the car and rarely stored in the case, the Audiolab didn't skip a beat. The Sony wasn't far behind it, just not quite as proficient in this area. The noises from the units themselves are different too. If they're across the room or there's any level of audio playing, you're likely not going to hear this, but the Sony does make a bit of a whirling noise. You can hear it if you start getting up close to it. The Audiolab for the most part is completely silent. I wasn't able to hear the sound from my seating position or when I had any level of volume playing, so just keep this in mind if you plan to have this sitting somewhere close to you within, a few feet. If you had this sitting on a desk or something like that, it really could be noticeable. Now this one's just kind of fun too, and it might be a big kicker for some people if they want to get into the music quickly. We're going to do a couple CD player drag races here. The CD player obviously has less going on in the background, no real operating system with apps to start up, so it really excels in getting to the music going, really quickly. If you have a little patience, the Sony doesn't really take that long, and likely still shorter than the time it would take you to get your streaming app open and into your software, then pick a song. And then we all know once you get into the app, you're going to search for 5 minutes till you find the one you want anyways. And that's where physical media really excels for me. And this goes for vinyl too. I tend to just relax more, let the entire disc play through rather than the dopamine fix of searching just for, hit after hit. Sometimes you can find some real gems if you just let them come to you. The final point of consideration before jumping into the vintage side, the build quality on the Audiolab is going to be far superior to what we have with the Sony here. The Sony's lightweight, made entirely of plastic, and would likely bruise my toes if I dropped it on them. The Audio Lab, on the other hand, is nearly entirely composed of metal, it's heavy, and if I drop this on my toes, I will break them. I'd love to demonstrate that, but maybe another day. Consider your needs on these when it comes to visibility of the screen as well, and the buttons on the front for track controls. If you have this across the room, it's likely the controls on the front that won't make any difference because you'd be using a remote either way. It's unlikely you're going to be getting up all the time to go and change the track controls. And the screen, it's available on both of them now with the upgrades, but as far as readability goes, the OLED display on the Audio Lab still wins out when you need to read it from any distance. The $150 all-in Blu-ray player won't win on every front, but you really shouldn't expect it to. It's a simple solution that can match up, in audio quality, but you're going to have to give up a thing or two to make that happen. I mentioned I'd put something together quick for the vintage gearheads who might want to dabble a bit more with modern touches centered around that PS200 DAC. Let's take the wonderful Pioneer receiver here and add a bit of functionality. First, let's include everything we just accomplished with the CD player, a $150 solution that rivals high-dollar builds, then utilize the PS200 DAC just a bit more. Let's bring in a Weem Pro Plus, in this case into the optical connection, so that we can utilize the vintage sound, but bring in a CD player over coax and a Weem streamer over the optical. Then the RCA output from the DAC just simply goes into the auxiliary input on the Pioneer. There's really nothing wrong with mixing a little bit of modern with vintage. In this case, we get a couple forms of digital audio coming through a really good DAC chip that doesn't take away from the vintage charm. Have your turntable coming in through the original phono preamp, use the FM radio if you want, but then have the ability to swing it over to a digital device really easily and increase its capabilities and usability, since that Weem is also going to bring a remote into the picture, which isn't really an option for most vintage gear. So before the internet goes down and leaves you in musical darkness, pick back up on that CD hobby. I did it over the past few years, and it's been a lot of fun. The selections are cheap, new and used. New is surprisingly cheaper than it was 25 years ago, and you can't really say that very often these days. I think this is going to keep trending back up, similar to vinyl, maybe not quite to that extent. So right now might be the perfect time to get in before it starts taking off a bit more and the prices start coming up with it. If you made it this far, you're truly a real one, and I'd greatly appreciate a subscription if you're not already a member of the community. And please interact down below as well as like and comment. Those interactions really help out smaller channels like this to push out to a much wider audience. It in turn gets us more opportunities to bring in new and interesting gear for the community. Take care and we'll chat soon. See ya.